All right, so welcome to another episode of the 𝗖𝗃 𝗖𝗃 podcast. I am your new host, 𝗬𝗏, and I'm actually joined today by one of my now good friends and actually my posing mentor, 𝗖𝗃 Pomroy. So today we're going to talk a little bit about internal validation versus external validation. But before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So born and raised in Wisconsin, so it's a small town, like 15,000 people. Me and my wife just recently moved down here to Florida to, of course, get away from the cold winters and just more opportunities as it's downpouring right now. So that's the caveat to living in Florida. But yeah, so from a small town, as far as like what I do or what I've done in the past, I was military, just like you, Robbie. And then also I essentially, so I'm of course a posing coach. And then I also do lifestyle contest prep. We are currently in the process of, me and a buddy of mine have 2 patents pending, just a bunch of other stuff in the works. So that's kind of a little bit of what I do. Entrepreneur, coach, husband.
The things.
All the things besides being a parent. That's not on the board yet.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. It's like what I told you. My goal in life is to be a dink. So haven't got the other half to become a dink yet, but that's kind of where I'm headed with it.
We have a cat and a chinchilla, and that right now we're content.
Yeah, your cat cracks me up, man. Every time I see stuff, either whether you post it on Instagram or like you'll send me pictures.
He's got issues.
No, it cracks me up. So I definitely relate to that because I'm from a small town too, and I feel like that actually having to do a move like that can be pretty daunting, especially going into something new. Like I feel like it takes a lot of faith and it takes a lot of your own basically like self-confidence in what you're capable of doing to be able to follow through with a decision like that. I know I've got tons of friends that would love to leave like our hometown that they just can't get themselves yet to take the leap. I think some of them will eventually. They're just not there.
It's scary. It's scary as shit. Trust me, like I was against it for a while, and then my wife, like I saw it as opportunity, right? So I'm from a small town, and it's like, okay, I can only network with this many people, and now, I mean, we're collaborating with Kai Green, and like I'm friends with some of the biggest names in the industry, and it's like, just networking. It's who you know, and sadly, I mean, it's if you live in a place where more people are well known, a lot of times you're gonna get more well known.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've actually debated too, because I know when I moved into my apartment back in the fall, I signed a lease for 13 months. I was trying to give myself basically a full calendar year to get situated. And then I've played around with the ideas. I haven't decided yet for sure. Like, I kind of think the next few months is going to really give me kind of some answers and clarity on what I need to do. But, I've even thought about moving myself. For a long time, I was thinking about Texas. Now if we end up collaborating with Kai as much as it sounds like when him and I are talking, then it's like, well, maybe Florida, which either way, I feel like is good with me because both are areas like the weather is something that I can handle. Having a lot of different people in the bodybuilding industry around.
Yeah.
So I will say, so the actual title of this podcast is Silencing the Inner Critic. And so I think that's kind of like the first cool thing to segue into, especially with you talking about having to move and do all this stuff. And so I think everybody can identify with being their own worst critic. I think that's super common. What are some of the things that you've kind of dealt with in basically like since like leading up to and since you kind of decided to take your whole leap to do something where you really felt like you could thrive and flourish?
Hopefully I can answer this correctly. For those of you that don't know, I am on prep. So, all right. So what was the question again?
Yeah. So it's basically silencing the inner critic. So leading up to when you had to move or when you decided to move, what were some of the things internally that you kind of had to learn to shut off and where like your own mind maybe started to get a little bit in the way?
Some of the things internally were, trying to like please my parents and my family and everything, and trying to essentially like please everybody, right? And not think for myself and what I want to do. So that was one thing where it's kind of like, okay, this is something I want to do. This is something we want to do. And we just, after a while, it's a lot of times like I'll hear people say like, oh, hey, like I really want to move down to Florida. And I'm like, okay, well, why don't you? Well, this. And it's like, if you want something bad enough, you'll make it happen. I knew that coming down here, there was going to be more opportunities for us. Plus, we'd be happier. So, I mean, that part of it. And then the other part of it is, moving down here and completely start working for myself. Right. So that itself was a huge leap of faith. Right. I didn't know what would happen. Luckily, my wife supported me and I'm not doing too bad. So
I would say not.
Yeah, but we can always be better, right? So I mean, I would say like just some of the biggest things and that I struggled with was, again, just kind of like that internal validation. Like, am I good enough to move down here? Like, do I deserve this opportunity? Do I deserve these opportunities? And it's it's one of those things where you have to come to terms with yourself and be like, hey, like, who gives a fuck what anybody else thinks? Like, if it makes me happy, I'm going to do what I'm going to do.
Exactly. So, having talked about some of that, so the first talking point that we're going to go over today is basically, is your validation internal or external? And I think the way that I kind of want to frame this too, especially to kind of flow along with your story, but do you feel like when you first moved, when we talk about validation, so for people that might be kind of confused, internal validation is basically things that you do yourself, being sure of yourself and what you do, and knowing that you are worthy of certain opportunities or you deserve certain opportunities because you've worked for them, to where external validation is really just seeking that from other people. Yeah. Do you feel like when you first moved to Florida and really dove in to jumpstart your career, do you feel like the validation that you looked for, do you feel like you had a lot more internal validation? Do you think first starting you actually sought out a lot more external validation?
I would definitely say internal validation when I first moved here, because it was like trying to prove myself to everybody here. And like I remember NPC Nationals, one of my friends, Juliana, she had essentially said, you don't, and we had brought this up at dinner, you don't have to prove yourself to anybody. You are right where you need to be. And of course, Kai ripped us a new one. But it's the you're right where you need to be type of thing that like really stuck with me. And that's kind of when my like entire mindset just kind of switched into more like internal validation. But yeah, it was definitely like trying to prove myself to everybody else. But I think NPC Nationals, when we were there, is probably when I like made that shift from external to internal. Like, don't get me wrong, like we all have a mixture of it, I feel, right? But it's the fine balance and which one you tend to move towards. I mean, just external wise, like I always say like money, materialistic things is a byproduct of success, but like how do you get there? Right? Are you internally validated by the way that you became successful, right? Because if you're only driven by the external of, hey, I got this many followers, I got this much money, look at my new Lambo, and it's like, okay, but what have you done to help people, right? Does it make your subconscious feel good? Right? And ultimately, like, we're here to help people. So I would definitely say I was more externally validated when we moved here, and then NPC Nationals was kind of when it switched for me.
Yeah. And I mean, I can definitely feel that too. And I think a lot of people are like that. I think when they first get into something or start on an endeavor, I think initially, I think we all are more externally driven rather than internally. I think it's just through time and maturity and whatever you're doing that you really kind of find that the inner voice that's not just the critic, but also basically kind of like your biggest cheerleader in what you do. Because I know when I first started in bodybuilding, a lot of a lot of it was a very externally driven thing. It was externally
Oh
driven
yeah.
to look good. It was externally driven, you know, to have my stuff liked on Instagram or on Facebook. I think then when it was still like a little more relevant. Hashtag exactly. You know, I miss MySpace. I liked being able to decorate my page and put music on it, and like I miss it. Being
Oh
able to
god.
make my stuff black and pink when I was a little high school emo kid, and I thought that was super cool.
Fucking
All those
MySpace.
things.
Wow. Oh god.
But yeah, I think the deeper that you get in to what you do, especially if you really have like a love and a passion for it, you eventually start transforming over to where, like you said, you know, you become a mixture. You gain a lot more confidence internally, and you do have a lot more of that internal validation with your, like, just with yourself, but it's still going to feel good when pop-ups. It's still going to feel really good when people comment on what you do or share your stuff.
Well, and I mean that's the natural like thing. Like if we see that people are liking stuff and whatnot, it's like, oh hey, cool, people actually like my stuff or they're viewing my stuff. That's cool, right? But I think when you just said like the confidence thing, I feel like people who lack confidence tend to be more externally validated versus internally validated, versus you have people with high confidence, they trust themselves, they believe in themselves, and you know, then they become more internally validated, and then they really don't give a crap what other people think.
Yep.
Right? Because that's me. I honestly like I always have this saying. It's like, and it mainly with lifting, if like anybody comes up to me and I'm like, why are you dropping the dumbbells like that? But I mean, just in life in general, we all have a purpose on why we do things. If you take time to focus on my purpose, you're taking away from your own.
Exactly.
Right? So I'm internally validated. You're trying to externally validate something, whatever. And it's just like, just focus on you, get your stuff done, and have a good day.
Yep. No, I think so. When I actually had about a 30-minute phone conversation with Kyle the other day, we were talking about a situation that I'm going through right now, and he kind of touched on some of that stuff when we were talking about how, and I think he brought this up too, like when we were at dinner with him one of the nights, but he mentioned how we are supposed to be basically the center of our own universe. And I kind of equate that to being internally validated.
Yep.
But when you run into problems is when you start to decide and you start to feel like you should be the center of everybody else's universe.
And then you feel externally validated.
And then, then you become very externally driven. And that's when there's a lot of things that are happening around you that can cause a lot more issues, a lot more problems, a lot more emotional reactions that really are unnecessary. And like you said, it just kind of takes your energy away, you know, continuing to live in your own purpose and become better at what you're doing and becoming better at your craft, because now you're focused on either getting credit elsewhere or getting validated elsewhere, or really just busy trying to shut other people out when it's like they're in their own lane, like stay in yours, you know. So he kind of talked about that. And he also talked about too how like the internal, like he didn't say it as internal validation, but it was kind of what he was alluding to, because he's like, the other thing that happens is as you become more successful, you will draw more attention to you. And initially, you know, the amount of positive attention versus negative attention is probably not going to be balanced, and you're probably going to receive a lot more negative attention at first, quite potentially, or the negative attention that you get might be a lot harsher, and that's a lot easier to get focused on if you're not confident in yourself and what you're doing and what you're capable of, and not only that, but where you're capable of going.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think it's super common, especially in this sport when it comes to that kind of thing, where people struggle.
Yeah, I feel like those who are successful in the sport are, and just bodybuilding in general, are more internally validated versus those who just do it for the gram or whatever. Yeah. You know, you're more externally validated. Like, don't get me wrong, like, you know, we are literally up on stage in our skivvies, like barely anything. So it's like, there's that slight external validation where it's like, okay, did I come in shredded? Did I come in full, like, how's my shape, everything, presentation? That little bit of external, but at the end of the day, it's body. Did you internally validate your progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you do better than last time, right?
Yep.
If you did, then you're good.
Yep. And not even just your progress, but like, what did you learn and what did you grow from in the process of the whole thing, like the process of getting to the stage?
Exactly.
So, and I think that's something that people take for granted. I know I brought it up a lot, but I see a lot of ties to what I do and other things. And I think I mentioned in my story a couple different times about how one of the changing points for me earlier this year was I actually heard 𝗖𝗃 speak, and he did a sermon called 𝗲 is Holy. And he kind of talks about this, how people get so focused on being there that they don't focus on the present and what you need to do here and the things that you need to put your energy into. And, you know, what are the things like in your character? What are the things in your habits that you could change or that you need to change in order to get to wherever, like get to point B, either a little quicker or even more importantly, just better prepared?
Yep. Yeah. No, it's, I normally equate that to, like, are you goal driven or are you process driven, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you only look for the goal or are you enjoying the process to reach that goal? Because people who just see the goal in mind and they don't understand, it's like, if you want to reach a goal, you have to go through these little goals to get to that big goal.
Yep.
So if you are more process driven, you're going to appreciate every single one of those little goals, right? And those are oftentimes the people who end up reaching their goals.
Yep.
Unless
And I
you're
know,
handed a silver plate.
yeah, which if that's the case, like I honestly, I think I know, well, I don't know. I don't think I've ever really been one to like be envious. I definitely think I've had times or had moments where I'm like, oh man, that would have been nice to like be born into this or that. But the way that I look at it now, I'm grateful for the roads that I've had to take and the things that I've had to go through, just because it's helped build me into the person like I've become and who I'm continuing to evolve into. And I feel like I would have missed out on a lot of that had I just had that stuff handed to me in the first place. Like there's a lot of lessons and just a lot of character building that I
Yep.
wouldn't have been exposed to or needed
Well,
or
and
felt that I needed.
yeah, well, and like, perfect caveat to this, I have this tattooed: potential is given, greatness is earned, right?
Yep.
So it's that philosophy of like, we're all born into a specific situation. Some people's situation are better than others, but the potential is there, right? It's given to you, but you have to earn that greatness, that success. And it's based off of like, hey, are you ready to put in the work? Are you actually going to hope that you get something handed to you and be or whatever, or are you going to be consistent, because consistency creates success.
Yep.
Right? We've been at this for, posing wise, you for a few months, but like, yeah, I'm a fine example of this. Is like, I've been a posing coach for almost 3 years, and I don't have an issue saying, like, before expenses, I made $1,700 my first year. I made $40K last year, right? I don't even know what I'm gonna make this year, right?
Yep.
So it's like that consistency, but also realizing like so many people don't become successful because they don't realize that they have the potential there, and they're too lazy to earn it. So
yep. No, I would agree with that. And yeah, it's definitely, especially in this sport, you have to get to a point where you're completely process driven. Because I know for me, like if I was just purely goal driven, like shoot, I probably would have gassed out after that first month that I was trying to post. Because like I look back at some of those videos from then, and I was like, oh
yeah,
oh.
I had my first ever posing video. It was cringeworthy, but it's
Yeah.
like to see how far you've come, right? That consistency, right? And like, look at how far you've come within, not even 6 months, right? So yeah, it's crazy when you actually put in the work and are consistent with things. because then you'll get shit done.
Yep. And then just finding a way to enjoy it. Like even just the little
Yes.
things, like just learning how, like for posing with me, just having a week where I start to move a little bit better, or going from when you and Jarek would put out the posing challenges, and I would literally be in the studio for 3 hours ripping my hair out because I couldn't figure out 50 seconds. And it's like now if I hear a song that I click with, like I can be brushing my teeth and have an idea within like the 2 minutes that I'm brushing my teeth. And
Exactly. Right.
so, yep. So it's like, but that never would have happened if I couldn't have appreciated like the small little benchmarks, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's a process.
yeah, no, it definitely is. So I'm going to actually change up the order of the talking points just a little bit because I think this will flow a little bit better. So I'm going to hide this one.
No pun intended.
What do you do when you don't feel validated?
Is this just in general or internally or externally?
I think
Just in general.
this is more kind of just in general, probably a little more externally focused.
I mean, I feel like this is with everybody. Like if we have something and like, you know, take a post, for example, where we're like, oh, this should be a good post, right? And then it only gets like 30 likes or something like that versus, you know, I post like a reel or something of me just doing a post-workout pose and it gets like over 300, right? You're like, what the hell, right?
Mhm.
Honestly, like the old me would have been like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? As of like right now, I'm just like, okay, reels are big, you know, they're going to do better. But like if you have a post, there's going to be some people who find, you know, influence and people who take it and listen to it. And I've had people message me, like even about my story that I did today about just like knowing your limits, but being able to push past what your body or what your mind is capable of, right?
Yep.
So I would say the old me, as far as like feeling validated, like I would have probably like ripped my hair out, right? Or what I have. But like now when I don't feel validated, I just kind of look at everything and I'm like it's more of a process, like, you know, like an equation. And it's like, okay, well, this is why this isn't happening. This is why this isn't happening. Like you know, we all kind of seek validation from everybody, but, you know, can we understand the process of wanting to seek that validation? Like if we're not getting that validation, okay, what's not allowing us to get that validation, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
So I don't really worry about it too much. Like we don't have to seek validation from anybody, right? If I don't feel validated doing something, then I go back to the drawing board and figure out how I can get it validated.
Yep. And I think one of the things, I think what's really cool is like when you go through a lot of different stuff in life and then you see parallels between things that at face value, like normally like wouldn't cross. But I know for me, some of the stuff that I've been able to do and put into practice, especially this last year, is, you know, I went through a lot of different events in my life that were pretty rough and had to go through a lot of therapy for, and, you know, still do like every couple of weeks. But they had basically, it's like CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy. But one of the tactics that they had us use is like, you know, if you start feeling a certain way about something, like digging into it, and it's like, well, wait a minute, why do I feel that way? And then taking stuff to actually just refute that. Like, because your mind, especially emotionally, when you get emotionally driven and you get out of this place of logic, like it's really easy to trick yourself into believing something that's not actually true. It's just usually some sort of fear or insecurity that is driving this thought, but it's not something that's actually valid. So I know for me, like I'll find different things when I start feeling this way and I need to like kind of reboost myself back up. And it's like, I'll almost kind of like make a list of things that kind of refute what I believe, like whether it's with posing or whether it's with bodybuilding or whether even it's just with like who I am as a person or just where I'm at, like success wise so far, and being able to kind of like write it down. It's like, well, I feel like this, is this actually true? And then when I write down everything else, like more times than not, it's just me emotionally getting to myself.
Yeah. I honestly look at it like this is like, if you are having that sort of issue, think of it like you know, like I think well, we'll see if this compares. Like, imagine like you're in a video game. You're the individual, right? You're trying to seek validation on something or whatever, and then you have to zoom out and like try and figure out, okay, this is where I need to go in the video game for the objective or whatever, right? And it's the same thing. It's like you have to zoom out, weigh the pros and cons, figure out what you need to do, zoom back in, and go.
Yep. I think the other thing that's really big for this too is I think this all kind of can tie also back into having like a purpose, like an actual purpose that doesn't just serve, you know, external needs or superficial needs, but something that's truly driven that is much, much bigger than you. And, you know, I think, like I said, like going through a situation right now that like you're aware of where you can kind of see this firsthand is when you take two different people that are doing the same thing, but you've got one person who is wanting to see something like beyond just their own success happen versus having somebody that's still kind of stuck and just really wanting to see their own little, like their own glow up, and then seeing how like those responses differ, like can be drastically different. So I think that's one of the biggest things too is, you know, in order to be, I guess we can kind of talk about this on like the next point, but the biggest play that goes into that is having a purpose that is much deeper and much larger than, you know, something like money or fame or likes on Instagram or something like that. So that way, when you do go through these lulls, you know, you still feel validated in what you're doing because it is serving a much bigger purpose. You're just in a point where, you know, externally it might look like things are plateauing, but internally you're doing all of the right things and you're still planting all of these different seeds. It's just like the time hasn't really gone by yet for those seeds to actually turn into something. If that makes sense. Yep. Just planting the seeds. So the last talking point that we have, and then since it's not live, we won't have a Q&A today. Values. So what values do you personally feel like people who are more internally validated and internally driven have, as opposed to people that maybe still tend to be a little bit more on the search for external validation?
That's a hard one. I guess give me an example.
So like one of the ones that I think what I just talked about was kind of an example of one is, you know, being a person that has a purpose greater than yourself, that's much bigger than yourself, I think comes from a place where you can be somebody that is more driven internally, therefore can find validation internally in what you do.
See, that's a hard one for me to answer.
It's like Winnie the Pooh. It's like sitting there just going tink, 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 tink.
Yeah. Well, I think definitely what you said. What values do we internally? Honestly, I can't think of anything. I'm sorry.
What about stuff like, what about something like integrity? What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, so like integrity, I mean, that's something that, I mean, either you have integrity or you don't. But like, if you feel validated as far as like just having integrity, then you're true to yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're doing the right things. So then you can physically validate yourself on that. If not, then, I mean, you don't have integrity, right? Yeah, I don't know.
I think I got a few, so I'll bring up a few, and then I'll just kind of get your take on it.
I think that would work better.
All right. So I think another one is somebody who really values in not seeing their own success, but actually seeing success of other people.
Yeah. Well, and that's me. So like, as far as like people become successful, well, it kind of goes back to like, you know, the byproduct of success is money, fame, whatever you want it to be. But how did you get there, right? Who are you helping? So I'm one of those people, you as well. We want to see other people succeed, right? So if we see other people succeed, then of course we feel internally validated. Mm-hmm. Now, then you get people who are more externally validated and they only really care about themselves. And they can do whatever, right?
Yeah.
But that I something like that definitely paints a bigger picture about somebody's personality too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that's a big one. So
yeah, and I also think, I don't know, a couple others that come to mind. Like one of them I think is honesty, and not so much of like lying to other people, but being being able to be honest with yourself and where you're at, you know? So I would
Yeah.
say,
Try not to sugarcoat shit, right?
yeah, and not, yep, and not only that, but not trying to make yourself bigger or smaller than what you are at that given moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, stuff like that, like, I mean, it's like being honest with yourself allows you to truly, I feel like it allows you to truly kind of see like who you are internally.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not honest with yourself, then you're going to just keep on spinning in a
Mm-hmm.
circle the entire time and you're not going to get anywhere. I guess like, and being honest with other people, like you can sugarcoat or you can be blunt.
Yep.
Right? Do you pride yourself by being somebody who's going to be blunt and telling you the truth, even if it hurts? Or are you going to sugarcoat and be like, oh, you're doing good, pat on the back, you know, like you're only going to hurt them.
Yep.
So,
yep. So I think those come to mind for me. I got a lot of these. I feel like though I was a little more prepared because I feel like given different events of this week, I've had a lot more time to think about some of this. Lots of reflecting going on just to make sure that I don't get into a situation like in the future where my behavior mimics other people that I know right now. But I think another one too has to do a lot with pride and ego. So I think somebody that, you know, is really truly internally validated,
internally validated.
Yeah. That they
are able to drop their, you know, they can be honest.
Yeah, they're able to drop their pride. And then they also don't have like an overly inflated ego.
Mm-hmm.
And then not only that, but this is where honesty comes back into play when you have those times, because everybody's human. I know that there's going to come a day where everything that I'm learning right now this week, I'm going to be tested on. Like I can already feel that in the air. So it's kind of why it's kind of why like I've been doing a lot of reflecting on it, because I know it's kind of one of those like what goes around comes around. And so I'm going to put you into a situation and you're going to either learn from this or you're going to have a very rude awakening someday, and you're going to look at the situation.
Cave or conquer. Ha 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 ha.
I see what you did there. But no, it's like you're going to have a situation where you look back and then there might be a moment where you're like, oh crap. Like I swore that I would never become this person or never be this person. And now I'm starting to act like this. Mm-hmm. And so people who are really can really be internally validated are capable of not only just not having like an overblown ego, but catching it as soon as it starts to inflate before it actually explodes.
And I've been there before, but you know, at the end of the day, like, you know, with all these things tied together, like if you're honest with yourself, a lot of times you will have greater pride in what you will have less of an ego. You want to see other people succeed and be, you know, getting their hand raised versus, you know, if you have the overinflated ego, you're not honest with yourself on certain things. And a lot of times you sugarcoat shit, you know, it's, you know, then you're definitely more externally validated. Right.
Externally driven.
That too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're in it for the gram.
In it for the clout.
Yeah. Yeah, basically.
Yeah. I don't know. Can you think of, now that I've like mentioned, like I've dropped multiples, so we're kind of on a train. Do you have any others that kind of come to mind before we do some just kind of closing comments, wrap things up? That face, you're like thinking so hard. It looks like you're trying.
I know I'm trying. It's like
you look like me trying to take a crap when I was in Florida.
It's not happening.
Last weekend.
It's not happening. Get home.
Yeah, nothing like getting a text. Way too much information. It's like, guys, the demon finally has been exorcised.
Oh God, values. I feel like we pretty much covered all the big ones. Yeah, I think you just gotta, like, those who just focus too much on materialistic shit just tend to like be going down the wrong path versus those who try to help people, try to do the right thing, try to be honest with themselves, have good communication, you know, are doing all the right things, are going to be going down the right path. Right. So that's, I feel like what we hit was pretty much the big ones. I can't really think of anything else.
I think I got another one that kind of came to mind, and I don't really know though if it's so much more of like a value, but just what do you think about, people having, what do you think about people being internally validated and driven versus externally, and like having a circle around them versus either having like a very not so close knit, like very superficial circle, or even just trying to like do it all on their own?
Well, I mean, if you have support and you have the right people around you, you don't really need that external validation.
Yeah.
Right? But if you don't have anybody, or you have people who, again, are going to sugarcoat, a lot of times you strive for getting that external validation. A lot of times, like, you're not honest with yourself, your ego and whatever is going to take over. So I think, and I'm a big advocate for this, but if you have a good support group and you have people who, like my wife, like you, like friends and family, and a lot of times you're going to be more successful if those people support you. A lot of times that can act like a catalyst. However, there are times when you get people who are just kind of like out in the blue and whatnot, and they don't really have a lot of people supporting them, but they're so driven, right? And I've seen that happen lots of times. That can kind of be that outlier where they're so intrinsically motivated and they don't really have a support group, right? But I would say definitely, like, you need less external validation if you have that support group.
Yep. So I actually feel like I can kind of identify with what you just mentioned, where you have somebody where it's like you're so driven. Because earlier this year, before like we got really close, I really talked to Jarek more, or like people like Tommy or Chris, or before I met Chad, just really actually getting like a really solid group of people who all want to do really, really great things, and not just for themselves, but because they really truly enjoy building something,
The bigger
and seeing
picture.
it. Yeah. And actually like seeing something that people look at through such a small lens and trying to like expand that. Cause like I even noticed for me, like earlier this year, there were still moments where I was a lot more externally driven, in need of external validation than I am now, ever since meeting all of you guys, and actually kind of gaining more of like a family, like a close-knit family of like-minded individuals.
Well, and what I was going to say, which actually, you basically gave a great example, is those externally motivated people who, or those internally motivated people who don't have that support, if they keep that focus and they just keep going, then I feel those individuals tend to find that support group.
Yep.
Right? But if you're trying to be like this lone wolf or whatever and whatnot, it's like you're gonna be the lone wolf. Like, you're not gonna have this support group, and you're gonna have people who are gonna sugarcoat shit for you and tell you that you're doing good and whatnot. But like, if you're internally motivated so much so that you are driven to reach your goal, that support group will create itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think Kai actually touched on that a little bit in the conversation, now that I think about it, the other day. Because he was talking about, when him and I initially spoke when we were in Texas, and I kind of talked to him about, he asked me a little bit, what do you want to do? Like, what is your vision for this? Like, what do you see? And then when we were texting the following week, and I was kind of explaining that a little bit more in depth, like the more that I thought about it, and then now getting to pull you in, and then after talking to him this week, like, it really doesn't sound like this is going to be the only thing. Like, it sounds like him and I are going to collaborate a lot more, which means I get a lot more opportunity to pull you guys in that much more often, bring in that much more collaboration, that much more different style, and we all get to really expand. And he talked about, when you have this attitude of where you are open to, like, you're not scared of somebody else stepping into your lane. If anything, someone starts to step in your lane, you actually get over and you're like, here, like, let me show you, or here, let me help you. Or, he was you guys.
Can you take constructive criticism, or do you turn it away?
Yep. And he's like, what happens is now, like, what you guys are doing is you're kind of forming this thing, and it really is truly forming into a movement. And those people who aren't allowed or aren't able, just not at a place in a maturity level to set their ego aside or deflate the ego, or realize what the bigger picture is. It's kind of like what you said. They take pride in it, but eventually what they're going to realize is that group that decided to work together to make something bigger, they're going to bench themselves.
And
they're going to hit their plateau.
They miss the bus.
Yeah. And then it's like they just sit there like, well, what about me? And it's like, well,
the bus was right there.
Yeah, you had a chance. Like
you had
the doors were open. Yeah.
And then it left. So
yeah. So I didn't really even think about it until you said it like that. And then I was like, we talked about that a little bit. So
yep.
But so I think to close up, since we don't have like a Q&A or anything like that, I guess my thing is, do you have any kind of final thoughts for not even people just in bodybuilding? Because I always try to keep it a little bit more open beyond that realm, but really anybody that's just pursuing any endeavors who are struggling with wanting all of that external validation. Do you have any tips and advice for things that they can do to start looking more inward?
I mean, the big thing is just make sure you have a plan, right? Make sure you have, if you don't have people who support you, potentially look for people who are wanting to do the same stuff that you are, right? So a lot of times, a team is always better than being by yourself, right? So I would say for people, like whether it's bodybuilding, fitness, entrepreneurial space, like just make sure you have a plan, and then just make sure like let stuff naturally happen, right? Because the second you try to rush things or you try to push the envelope, a lot of times you'll miss something, and then it's like, oh, that opportunity left, right? Because you were so extrinsically motivated by, oh, we need to get this done, versus a lot of the stuff that was able to come to my plate and the stuff that I have in the works, I just let it naturally happen, right? Yes, was there a little bit of work done and networking and whatnot? Yeah. But I mean, gotten to do a posing seminar with Terrence. I'm friends with Jarek, and we're running Flow together. I'm a coach, Patton, like the collaboration with Kai. Like, granted, I kind of mentioned my name a few times, but I mean, it's
but that all still came from, it was like that all came from you though. And like it's one of those things where I talked to Kai, and it's like, all of the people in the last few months that I've seen that have inspired me, and not just inspired me, but as I was trying to come into my own, like not only just inspired me, but continued to cheer me on. And like I saw the hard work and the drive in them, and not just that, but like the pure intention of wanting to see other people succeed. It's like I remember that. It's like I already kind of have a list of people that I want to pull into it, and like those were the things that defined it for me. Like if somebody comes into this, like this is who I want and this is why. And it was even beyond just the fact of people being incredible posers. It was just who they were as people when I interacted with them. So realistically, like you still got yourself that opportunity just by being
letting it naturally happen.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of times people become internally, or will seek external validation because they are trying to be somebody that they aren't. Right.
Yep.
Us as human beings, we're all very unique. We all, have the same, right? Yep. We're just born into different situations, right? Exactly. But if you try to veer away from that situation and try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? Then, I mean, you're taken away from what you want to achieve. You need to just focus on who you are as an individual, focus on growing yourself as an individual. Don't rush anything. Let stuff naturally happen, and hope everything works out in the end. But if you're consistent with everything, then a lot of times stuff will work itself out. But like even being an entrepreneur literally is the definition of taking risks, right? Sometimes those risks pan out, and sometimes it's just like, oh, up in flames. Right? So yeah, it's just stay true to yourself.
Yeah.
That's the biggest piece of advice. Stay true to yourself and let shit naturally happen. If you try to rush it, then you start to become this extrinsically motivated, validated person, and then you kind of lose touch of yourself. Oh, I want to be like him. This bodybuilding, I want to look like this person. Well, you never will, because you don't have their genetics. You might not even have their work ethic. They're doing something that you're not, right? So focus on yourself, get shit done. That's it.
And I think I would emphasize kind of what you said about the whole time thing. I think that's the hardest thing that people in this generation come to terms with now. And I also think that's why people seek external motivation, especially on stuff like Instagram, because it's something that's instant. It's an instant gratification. It's an instant reward for something that you did. There is a process that I heard. It was the same guy that talked about 𝗖𝗃 𝗲𝗏, but he said you have a process, right? There's a system in place, and it's seed, sow, time, work, and then harvest. And he goes, a lot of people skip over that time piece. Like, you have a seed that's like your vision, basically. You sow the seed, you start planting those things in different areas. And then people think, well, I work at it and then boom, like receive the reward from it. And he goes, a lot of people skip over the fact that there is this big thing where it's time. Like, you have to give it time. And that amount of time, it's not determined. You have no idea how long it's going to take, but that's where you have to be patient. And that's why internal validation is so much more important, because again, like I talked about earlier, you have that lull where you're not getting all that external stuff. Like, you need to know that, I'm on the right track. It's just, it is going to take some time. Like, social media and the way that we try to live our lives now, like make $1 million in 6 months, like in general, like that is not realistic. You have to put the work.
Patience is a virtue. And a lot of people, like I said, try to rush things, right? Like, you're going to hit your ebbs and flows, and at some point it's going to take off. And, as long as you stay humble, you drop your ego, everything will work itself out.
Yep, I agree. Well, I think that is, we're at 54 minutes. That actually went pretty pretty fast. I can't talk today, man. I don't know what is wrong.
You're telling me, like, I've been looking at the time. I'm like, okay, it's my next meal.
Yeah. See, you have an excuse though. Like, you're on prep. You're like full prep brain mode. I have no excuse.
Yeah.
I'm just a mess. My only thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, that is basically everything for today's podcast. Thanks for, hopping on here. Should definitely do it again sometime. When we get some topics for August, I'll shoot you kind of the list that we come up with. And then if you see anything you like, let me know and do this again.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you for joining. Peace.